Hey watch friends, today we're going to check out another piece from the German micro brand Waldhoff, and this is their Multimatic II. I mentioned another piece because we actually recently featured their Ultramatic II for a full review, but additionally I do encourage you, if you missed it, to go back and check out. I did a triple unboxing of this one as well as the Ultramatic and the Continental, so you can check out not only the packaging, but you can see those head to head. So with that, let's go ahead and dive straight into this. We'll knock out the basic specs, then we'll check out different footage, get a deeper dive feel for this watch, and then finish with the overall summary. First, for the basic specs, this comes with a 2-year warranty. The case, measured from roughly the 3 o'clock to 9 o'clock on my calipers, is coming in at 40.9 millimeters. The bezel steps down to 39.7 millimeters, and that's measured right at that flat portion there. The lugs are, just as with the other two, going to be 22 millimeters. The lug to lug is 47.8 millimeters. The total thickness is 12.3, which is consistent with the Ultramatic despite its smaller size, and that is inclusive of this crystal. The crystal itself is a flat sapphire crystal, and I believe it does have an inner AR coating, though I didn't receive confirmation of that, and they don't have it listed on their site, but it definitely appears to show well here. Let's pick up some reflectivity. You can see it doesn't wash out completely, doesn't do too badly there with the vibrant color. That's, I would say, pretty typical for what I get for glare here. As far as the movement, this one has a load of complications, and that is because it features the Miyota 9100. That is an automatic movement with roughly a 40-hour power reserve. It has hacking, hand winding, higher beat, 28,800 beats per hour, all that kind of good stuff. Nice, reliable movement. Good choice. We've looked at this before, as well as many other 9 series. What sets this one apart is its particular configuration. It is going to have your primary hour and minute hand, but then additionally, you have a load of complications. So you have at the 12 o'clock position, you can see it has a power reserve. Then at the 9 o'clock position, you can see that it has a day. At the 3 o'clock position, it has your month. Directly below that, it has your date. And then at the 6 o'clock position, it actually has a 24-hour subdial as well. So you've got a lot going on there. And we'll talk about that more as we go through. As far as the water resistance, this one is only 30 meters or 3 atmospheres. A bit disappointing. That's barely splash water resistance. So I always like to see at a very minimum 50 meters, ideally 100 meters or more. But that being said, it's a dressier style watch, so it kind of comes with the territory, though the Ultramatic was 50 meters. The weight on this factory included strap is coming in at 90 grams. So it's pretty consistent with Ultramatic, a little bit, I believe about 10 grams less if I recall correctly. So not too bad there. So now that we have the basic specs out of the way, let's get a better feel for this actual model. First, for the colors. This one comes in a crazy amount of colors, so I'm not going to go through them all. Today we're looking at the coral version, which is kind of a salmon coloration or a copper. There's additionally a silver, there's a black version, there's a rose gold with green dial, there's a blue version, and a ton more that if you check out their website, that's of course linked down in the description, you can see they've offered a wide variety of these. The textures on this, just like with Ultramatic, the texture is going to be completely different. However, it has an insane number of textures. As you go through, it's hard to know where really to begin. This one, unlike that one that had Geneva striping, this has flat portions, but it does have a lot of vertical striping as you go through. So that's, I would say, the primary finish. As you look around, though, you can see that there's all kinds of others. There's diagonal cuts out towards the side and perimeter that carries through up to the power reserve, though that has tighter vertical, as well as the diagonal that cut into that. You've got different direction diagonal down at the 6 o'clock position, plus of course the cutout for the date wheel. Then you've got the subdials, and then inlaid into the subdials at the 3 and 9 position, you can see that has kind of like a sunburst guilloche pattern. So really a whole heck of a lot going on. Additionally, just like the Ultramatic, this does have a prominent chapter ring that runs around the perimeter. This one is not nearly as wide as the Ultramatic is, at least to my eye, for overall proportions, and I think it fits a little better overall. It has the flat portion, of course, but then it also has that kind of slope step down, and it does have printed hashes, just as the Ultramatic did. Shifting over to the hardware, the handset is going to be very similar, if not the same on this one, though I imagine also shrunken down. This is, just like with the Ultramatic, polished, skeletonized Dauphine is how I would describe this. I did notice the tip is actually blunted out on the outside, however it does have the sharp pointed triangle of the Dauphine for that, and that is actually true of the Ultramatic as well. I believe I misspoke in that one and said it was pointed on both sides. This does have, just as with the Ultramatic, it does have facets, so with that polish and the facets, you get a lot of light play going on there as well. It has similar markers as well. At the 12, 3, 6, and 9, you do have Roman numerals applied. On the Ultramatic, you only had the 12 o'clock. And then the rest of them are going to be pretty similar. You have what I would describe as 3D trapezoids, and those actually do slope down. So with that cut on the chapter ring, where that slopes down towards the dial, the indexes actually follow that as well, which I think that's a really cool touch. So I actually like that quite a lot. I think that's slick. Shifting over to the Lume. The Lume on this, just as with the Ultramatic, it's not the most impressive Lume in the world. I find with this one, I think it works a little better without trying to work in the moon. Even though I think the moon was a cool touch, it just didn't really execute that well. So here, for being a dressier style watch, it's not bad. It's definitely, again, not a Lume monster, but overall, I find it to be okay. As far as the bezel on this is a fixed bezel, just as with the Ultramatic. The finishing's additionally going to be the same, where it is a flat on the side, and then it comes up to a slope, full polish all the way around, and just as we talked about, it is recessed or set back as well. Shifting over to the case, again, this is going to be extremely reminiscent overall as the Ultramatic. You're still going to have a slab side configuration. It still has the milling, and yes, that is milled in there, not just etched for that. And it does have the dual texture, so you have the polish accents that are kind of tucked in, but then additionally you have those brush portions that sit proud. Just like with the Ultramatic, it gets loads of light play, but it also picks up loads of fingerprints, so that's always kind of a trade-off with the polish. I've tried to manage those as best I can here, but it's honestly virtually impossible. As far as the lugs, just like with the Ultramatic, this is full polish for the lugs. However, unlike the Ultramatic, this one does have screws, which I believe the screws are just actually accents, because this does have quick release spring bars, and they do work just to pull the strap there. So I believe those are just accent touches for that, and that's kind of an interesting choice for that, and I wonder why they did that with this one and not on the Ultramatic. I personally probably like that overall look on this version versus just the straight polish on the Ultramatic. Shifting over to the 3 o'clock side, you can see that the downturned lugs are still present here, just as they were on the Ultramatic. But additionally, though, there is no crown guard on this, which I think is in keeping the style, with the style. As far as the crown itself, this is going to be basically, I believe, the exact same as with the Ultramatic. 7.3 millimeters. It is a push-pull configuration. This one, though, is an automatic, so that wasn't necessarily a given to have a push-pull, but I think it works for the overall style. It's still going to have that coin edge construction, still sits proud of the case, and it still is signed with their crest on the exterior. You do additionally, though, at the 3 o'clock side, pick up this pusher, which that controls your month there, and you can see that advance. The rest of your complications are going to be traditional for that, so you would be able to just pull to your first position and turn those either clockwise or counterclockwise to manipulate accordingly for the rest of your settings. And then, of course, the rest is just going to set like any other Miota. Shifting over to the Caseback. The Caseback on this, again, is going to be very reminiscent in most respects of the Ultramatic, with the most obvious difference being because of the different movement. It's still held in with screws. The finish is principally going to be polish again, so it is again a fingerprint magnet overall. It still has a noticeable exhibition window, but this time it's not as expansive because of the smaller size of the watch, as well as the different movement. But it does have, in this case, it's an automatic versus the manual wind there, and this does have a custom rotor with nice machine turning and application of their crest, so that's nice. Shifting over to the Bracelet. The strap on this is 22 millimeters at the lug, and it does taper down to 20 millimeters at the clasp, just as with the Ultramatic. It's again going to be a leather kind of with an alligator kind of texture or finish to that, though I don't believe it's actually alligator. As we already looked at, it does have quick release spring bars. Just as with the Ultramatic, I find that this one does sit tall on the wrist. Part of that, I'm sure, is breaking in of the leather strap, which hasn't been accomplished here. But as far as the overall case itself, I do think this one sits proudly, and we'll talk about that further. As far as the clasp on this, or the buckle rather, this is polished, and it does have a nice signed little crest there as well for continuity. Alright, so now that we have a better feel for the watch, let's go ahead and shift over to some comps. First, naturally, I wanted to bring in one we've looked at in the past, though a different colorway. This is one that arrived recently. This is the Sovereign Calendar. This is another 9100. So this just gives you an idea as far as kind of the different execution. As you can see, there's always a lot going on with this just by the nature of that movement, but you can see different takes on a more of a simple dial with just kind of a sand texture all the way through versus a lot of textures here, a rehot versus a wide chapter ring, all that kind of stuff. So that just gives you an idea as to how differently this presents with the same movement and the same underlying complications. Next up, This is, to give you an idea of the coloration, this is a Zelos Comet, and this is what they refer to as the salmon versus the coral here. And you can see certainly this does, when you put them side by side, pick up more of kind of like a pale coloration versus this one, which is a little more of that reddish, pinkish salmon color for that. And then next, one I haven't brought out for a comparison here in a while, this is the second hour, and this is their mandala. This is the original version. They've actually had the Mark II and some burst variants. But I just want to show, because these both do have a fair amount of texture going on, but you can just see the difference of kind of a cleaner application of that, or I should say a more simplistic application, versus this with having a lot of busyness going on with all the complications that that has. All right, so now that we have all that out of the way, let's go ahead and wrap things up with my personal view of the positives, critiques, as well as the summary. And I will say these differ from the Ultramatic. There's some overlap here, but there are definitely some important distinctions. First, the textures. I'm going to say the textures I think are actually cleanly applied. You know, there is a lot that's going on here. In the way that they butt all of those together with keeping crisp lines, I think that's impressive as far as the overall finishing of that, whether that's pressed or otherwise. I think it was well executed. Now, whether you think it's too busy or not, we'll talk about that here momentarily. The color, I really think it's attractive. I love the way that this one plays with the light. You know, we saw here, as you get it in certain angles, it's a little more pale. Certain angles, it's a little more saturated and vibrant. I really like that, that dynamic nature of it. Additionally, with all those textures, you get a lot of light play there as well. And then similarly, with that earth at the 6 o'clock position, you get a lot of coloration that's coming through that with kind of that blue pop. And then, of course, you have the sub-bow, or the sub accents where you pick up the blue there. And that blue, I think, complements this Dow color as well. So those are good touches. And then finally, the finishing. This is one that it was important that I wanted to highlight, because while I had the sample of one for the Ultramatic, I also only have the sample of one for the Multimatic. I've got to say, the finishing on this, to me, is much better and more impressive, which is kind of surprising, because this one's only coming in at $789. Yes, you lose the tourbillon, which is the biggest claim to fame for the Ultramatic. But that being said, the fact that these are pretty similar watches in many respects for the overall design, this is kind of just like a reduced version and with a lesser, quote-unquote, lesser movement for it. It's great, great movement. But that being said, you know, for this, I found that the finishing, everything is tighter. I couldn't find any notable flaws or anything along those lines. So that actually is very welcome there. And I neglected to mention at the outset, they did actually send this one in. They sent all of them in. This one is not a loaner. I do get to actually keep this one, so that worked out well for me. That this is the better finished of the two, despite being a lower price point. But that's not to say it's without critiques. So shifting over to the critique section, I do want to mention some of these are going to be the exact same. So first off, we talked about it as we went through, but additionally, some of these are the same as the Ultramatic. It does still sit tall. You know, the overall dimensions and specs, so now you actually have a shrunken down case that still has the same overall thickness. So despite the fact that Miyotas are generally thin, this one with having the hand sack, all the subdials, all that layering and everything, it is still relatively thick. At 12.3 millimeters, it's by no means a thick watch if we were talking about a diver. However, with having a slab side and dressier styling, to me it wears and presents thicker than I would expect. So as we looked at with the Ultramatic, with having the comparisons there, the specs can be misleading. This definitely, I think, wears thicker than I would expect for a 12.3. I would love to have seen this shrunken down, but I realize it's probably not possible with everything that they did or wanted to pack into this. The busyness. Just like with the Ultramatic, it has a heck of a lot going on. There are so many textures, so many different directions that this has you heading all over the place. Everywhere you look, it's a new angle, a new cut. You know, that's going to be, for some, I'm sure, attractive. For other people, they're going to find it to be much too busy and overwhelming for how much there is to kind of take in when you look at this watch. So it definitely does look, in some respects, kind of cluttered. Part of that's the nature of the movement with all those complications, but they really exacerbated that, in my opinion, with the textures, which, again, I do think are nicely done, but all of them together, it's a lot. And then polish. You know, just as we talked about the Ultramatic, I am not a huge fan of having this much polish. While it does add to some of the dressiness, I think they could have actually visually played with things if they just did polish accents. So add some kind of curvatures, add some brushing, and then polish accents to it. I think they could have visually slimmed this out and kept it from wearing as thick as it does. And additionally, they could have kept me from having to constantly try to get fingerprints off of here to get decent footage for it. So there you have it. Overall, where does that leave us? At the end of the day, I've got to say, this one to me is a heck of a lot easier to recommend than the Ultramatic. The Ultramatic, I think, had some potential to it, but you're talking two completely different price points. This one at $789 versus that one at $1,599, so roughly $800 versus $1,600. Is the $800 additional dollars worth it to you to get a tourbillon while you have some of the other characteristics with it, especially if you have a smaller wrist? To me, the answer is clear. It's no. This one is already a fairly large watch to begin with. Price point wise, it's not the cheapest at $800 to begin with, though I do think the finishing, it's easier to justify in this one with everything they have going on than that one at $1,600, especially since this one was better executed, at least in these samples. So there you have it. I hope this has been helpful for you. If you did enjoy it, please do tap that like button. And as always, if you haven't done so already, give that subscribe button tap, and I'll hit the camera in the meantime. And then finally, drop me a comment. Let me know what you think. Do you like either of these two models? Would you go for the Ultramatic or the Multimatic? Which color is your favorite? All that kind of good stuff. Thanks for watching.